Hello, this is Ryan Reisert, your host. This is going to be a very different podcast series than anything you've experienced on the market. What I'm trying to do is change things up a little bit. Rather than having a special guest and one topic with great conversation that goes away, we're going to host a series of experts and others who have perspective on different topics over a period of time. Gather that in a series of episodes and roll that out until we've really exhausted a topic. So hopefully you enjoy this podcast, and thanks again for listening in.
All right, so really excited for our next guest on this topic. I'd like to introduce Bryan Whittington. Bryan?
Well said. Hey, I guess good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you having me on, Ryan.
Yeah, it's a lot of T's.
It is. So, but that's why we don't pronounce them. So it's a lot of D's. So Whittington.
Yeah, Whittington. Bryan, well, thank you so much for joining us today. Just so folks know your background, because I think it's really unique here. Can you tell people a little bit more about your background quickly of what you've done in the past and what you're doing today? Set some context for our topic.
We kind of roundabout way of getting here, but started off as an Airforce pilot, got sick, fell in love with entrepreneurship whenever I was flying airplanes. Student of the game since about 2002, 2009, stumbled across this little place called Sandler Training. Rocked my world, started doing that, really getting heavily involved between sales and marketing, the alignment thereof, and really how do you drive revenue in small to mid-sized businesses. So that's what I started doing. Started up my company, EBS Growth, about close to 2 years ago, and made a massive pivot just a couple of months ago, and here we are.
Yeah, well, the background that you have, especially for this topic, from the military to then training, and now as a CEO of a business and running your own business, I think will bring some great perspective here. So let's get right into it. How do you feel, or do you believe in this rise of the revenue intelligence, this coaching culture that we talk about? And maybe you don't even know that as hot over where you're at, because you're out in Pittsburgh, but do you see this stuff around LinkedIn? What do you think about it?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny whenever you look at revenue and intelligence or coaching movement. Anytime that I see movement, I think fad, and this too shall pass. So I think really whenever I was looking at this, there's nothing new under the sun. I think it really harkens back to running a good business. Do you know your numbers? Is there good communication, good alignment between the organization and the department, or are you siloed and nobody knows what they're doing? So really what this is good communication and running a good business in my mind.
Yeah, well, you hit on something I think will be interesting for us to talk about, because I know we're both passionate about, the math of sales. And right. And you said, hey, you know your numbers to run your business. And when we think about revenue intelligence, it's this, this made up word from some tech companies to try to put a category in here. But the reality is like, hey, let's put some numbers behind what we're doing, right? Like, let's be objective in some of the decisions. That's how I think about it. But why do you think this is starting to catch fire, or at least in tech?
Well, especially now, we're now post-COVID-19 or whatever they're calling this, in pandemic days. So now it's not the purple unicorn as they were calling it. We really need a good, well-run, profitable business. So now it's, riding the camel or leading the camel. And so did we hire the right people, set proper expectations, train them up, have the numbers to know, are they hitting benchmarks? And if they're not, train them, coach them, mentor them to hit those benchmarks, and then continually improve it. And if we're not able to, if we don't know our numbers, if we don't have that rev ops or revenue intelligence, there's no way that you can have that coaching culture. And also, if you're not hiring right, that growth mindedness in properly hiring and creating a culture of learning and growing, once again, you're going to fall short. So although these are buzzwords right now, Ryan, I would really suggest back, like I said, it's just good business.
Yeah. Well, again, you're hitting on something that I think is really interesting to me, because, you know your numbers, coach to those numbers. How do you feel about this? A little bit different off topic, but it's on topic here, not one of the original questions, but How many people do you know when we're engaging, especially since you do a lot of this, sales development work on behalf of companies? That's what you do as a service offering. How many business leaders do you talk with that actually know their numbers?
None. There is one gentleman, a startup person out here. If I could drop a name, a guy by the name of Ed Engler. And he's one of the very few people that I know that really drives this into his startup companies. But for a decade of me training, coaching, and mentoring sales leaders, and me asking these questions to get their input, Ryan, to be candid, if I had three, I'd be surprised.
Yeah, it's so crazy because, I've created so many different types of calculators around the math of sales, and I go, what's your goal? What's your average value? And as soon as you start asking those numbers, if there's more than one person in the room, you can't get a consistent answer. And then you also have so many it depends, hims and haws, and that's just not possible, right? There, like your math of sales is your math of sales. And so when we think about like the basics, like run a good business, train good people, know your numbers, have a benchmark. Why do you think people are so inclined to look at what everyone else is doing versus themselves?
Yeah, well, I think everyone's inclined to look what everyone else is doing because they have no clue themselves, and it's not
Mhm.
really their fault. Up until recently, the way that you did sales is they looked at sales as being really good with people or having the personality, and they didn't really look at the art and science and engineered uh, methodologies that go into it. I mean, whenever I was teaching Sandler training, some of our best salespeople were engineers because they knew how to follow the process.
Mhm.
And it's usually really smart people, the engineers, the software engineers, the developers. They create these products, so they create these services. And so they hire on these salespeople because they feel uncomfortable to sell. And so they hire these salespeople that seem